So I'm very pleased to welcome Jeannine LaPrad to our ASAP Professional Education Member Advisory Group meeting this month. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeannine. Jeannine serves as a Senior Fellow at the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, where she advances CSW's mission of catalyzing transformative change in education, economic, and workforce development through research and action. Jeannine has led a range of client engagements with public agencies, foundations, and industry associations focused on reshaping post-secondary education to make it more accessible for non-traditional students, as well as reinventing employment policies, systems, and practices that create more equitable outcomes for low-income workers and communities. And Jeannine has a whole other range of client work, research work that you can learn about on her bio, which I'll put a link to in the chat. But we are so excited to welcome her today to share with us some insights about creating more inclusive, diverse, and open pipelines into the climate change adaptation workforce. For it to be a catalyst for us to really start thinking about what does it mean for us to transform this field into something that truly serves and attracts all types of potential workers, professionals, and applied researchers, and ultimately makes climate adaptation work and the field stronger and better. So thank you so much, Jeannine. Welcome, and I will turn over the floor to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Rachel. I'm very excited to receive the invitation to be with all of you. I'm getting some feedback. It sounds like it might have gone away. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have prepared a few slides. Rachel, am I able to share my screen?
I just gave you a higher level of access, so I think you should be good now.
Great. Okay. All right. Is everyone seeing my presentation all right?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So again, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm really grateful to be able to join such a mixed group of professionals who care a lot about the same things that I care about. So while I'm going to be focusing primarily on my work that has been at the intersection of education, economic, community, and workforce development since about 2003, so 17 years ago now, I also began to try to weave into my work with the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce an emphasis on sustainability. And what that essentially evolved into was a set of opportunities for me to work more in areas of the economy that had to do with not only sustainability, but really ultimately with, I think, some of the work you're all involved in, which sort of the emergence of a body of work in communities that has to do with climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So I'm going to try to weave in some of the prior examples from that work into what I share today, but the basis for my presentation will be on what's happening in terms of workforce development and developing more equitable pipelines. So I'm hoping that with my presentation, I'll be sharing a range of things that might pique your curiosity and interest to learn more, and that might also spark some questions for you to share as part of a discussion of what I share. And I think most importantly, what you're all doing and what some of the questions and opportunities for action that you're seeing. I would absolutely love to learn more about how this all lands with you and where you're seeing some of the opportunities to apply, potentially apply some of what I'm going to share. So as I mentioned, there's a body of work that CSW, my organization, has been involved in. I think what's most important to note is that for probably the last 5 years or so, we have been really centering more on diversity, equity, and inclusion in workforce development. And more recently, we've really been centering on racial equity and inclusion. And our work has generally been grounded around this kind of overarching model for community level change. And I think some of the most important aspects of this model that are relevant to the conversation today is that we believe fundamentally in the importance of any education and training program that is in place today, whether that be a postdoctoral program, a doctoral program, a certificate program that's available at a community college, a K through 12 program that's in a high school, that I think we know more and more from research that it's critical that all of these programs be grounded in the relevance of the learning and the application of that learning to work and to problems and opportunities that exist in the real world. And so for our field of workforce development, I think what that means is that it's really critical for any of the programs that people are developing to be based in the needs of the economy and the community and what's happening both for businesses in a community as well as workers. So this framework here that I'm sharing just kind of gives you a broader picture for, on the left side of this model, some of the key components that we encourage any education and training partners we're working with to really keep in mind. So we focus primarily on encouraging public-private sector partnerships. We encourage all higher education and community college and K-12 programs that we're involved in to be really developing those programs in concert with workers and companies or businesses in the sector that they're focused on. We look at a range of policies, program issues, and the practices of educators and other people involved in designing and delivering the programs.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't think we're seeing the slides that you're seeing. We are still on slide 1.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's odd. Let me see how I can get out of this. Okay. How's that? Are you now seeing it?
Yes.
A different slide? Okay.
And if you want to put it in, yeah, that works. That's a good size. If you're able to put it in presenter view, I think that would be perfect. But if not, this works too.
Let me get there. Remind me of where I'm finding presenter view.
Yep. If you just go to the home tab.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Slideshow tab.
Slideshow, yes. Okay. Oh, use presenter view.
Present online. Nope. Oh, sorry. That's okay. We can just
okay.
Let's do it like this. This is all good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because if I go into presentation mode, is that better or no? You still lose me.
I think it might still be loading for us, but let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we just use this view? That'll work just fine. Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that.
No, it's all a learning process for all of us.
Okay. So I was just showing so this is the graphic I was speaking to, and on the left side of this visual is just some of the key elements that I was speaking to in terms of making sure that education and training programs are grounded in the labor market, grounded in the community needs, grounded in business needs, and grounded in worker needs. So then, as I mentioned, it's also important for us now to be really centering our work on equity and inclusion. And so what that means, this is a slide that's actually from some work I've been doing in Detroit with a group of organizations that are all committed to increasing equity and inclusion in their programming and making sure that their organizations are not only centered on equity and inclusion, but are practicing and doing things that really move forward that commitment. The other thing then that's guiding our work right now is looking at what's happening in response to COVID-19 and how people are thinking about just and resilient recovery. And so this is a framework that our organization is working with a number of the communities we're focused on and working with, and a number of the organizations. And I think what's important to note about this framework and just where we all are in terms of the recovery from the pandemic, if we can even say that we're in a recovery mode at this point, is that I think what I'm seeing in terms of the funding available for education and training programs, I don't imagine that the public sector, philanthropy, or even the private sector are going to be investing in education and training programs that aren't also meeting a commitment to racial equity and inclusion in particular, but I think more generally for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think we're seeing a lot of funding already, and especially from philanthropic organizations going into focusing more on racial equity and inclusion, and I think that's only going to get stronger. I think the other thing we're seeing from a financial and a funding perspective is that there's going to be not only an emphasis on making sure that youth or younger people, younger adults get access to these education and training programs, but that also adults who have been left out of the prior economy are going to have a way into the emerging economy, and that the jobs that are available are really being provided at a level that people think are essentially good jobs. So this is just kind of an overarching framework that's guiding our work. So right now, in terms of what employment equity looks like in the fields that I intersect with, so I've just tried to share or give a high-level view of what that looks like in terms of the three sectors I mentioned: workforce development, economic development, and community development. So in terms of economic development, I think what we're seeing right now is a number of communities really looking at what are the businesses, what are the jobs that are being created right now, where is there high demand, what do these jobs look like, what are these companies doing in terms of being committed to trying to improve job quality, making sure that workers are safe, making sure that education and training programs and policies and practices are in place, and that they're really there to support the development of a more diverse workforce. So there's a whole body of activity that we're seeing happening in that kind of at the intersection of economic development and community development. There's a whole body of activity we're seeing sort of more within the workforce development field. And again, there's just at a community level, a commitment to making sure that the organizations that are there are kind of aligned and working well with the business community and with residents to make sure that people have access to the jobs and to education and training programs that they need. Within the field of workforce development, there's like a ton of work that's going on at kind of a policy level, looking at how we redesign workforce systems and programs, looking at ways that from a leadership perspective and a cultural perspective inside our organizations, that we're doing things that really align with our commitment to racial equity and inclusion. There's been some excellent reports that help education and training programs, for example, do a deeper dive on what program access and outcomes look like for what you're offering. And then there's a whole body of work that's really getting at what is the mix of staff competencies look like and what kinds of partnerships and engagement do staff have outside of your organization to really focus on creating this more diverse pipeline. So these reports are ones that I would recommend as foundational. I'm going to also share a few more examples. I mentioned that in the context of trying to make sure that the pipeline to education and training programs and ultimately to work, that people are focused on creating equitable access and outcomes. There's also much greater emphasis being placed right now on the nature of jobs and what's actually going on in the workplace to make sure that a more diverse workforce actually stays engaged in the work and the organization and stays in long enough to be successful and potentially move their way up. So there's a whole body of work out there around like defining what quality jobs look like. And then there's tools. For example, I worked with Community Development Financial Institute out of California to help develop a toolkit for small businesses who want to make sure that the jobs they're providing are good jobs and that they actually are investing in their workforce in ways that help increase the diversity of their workforce and deal with retention and other issues that the businesses might be facing. So this is, I think, an important body of work, even for education and training providers to be thinking about, because at the end of the day, if you're all not in a place to help influence and inform what's happening in the world of work, you're likely preparing people for opportunities that might not ultimately be sustainable. So again, back to what I said earlier, there's this important symbiotic relationship between education and training programs, working with businesses directly, and working also with workers. So the field of workforce development, a lot of the education and training programs I'm working with, they're all very much focused on this, just primarily looking at, are we ensuring there's equitable access to programs and services and that people are getting to the outcomes they need to be able to get into the workplace and move up. So there's a body of work right now. The three things I've got highlighted in gray, I think are probably most relevant or applicable to the education and training programs many of you might be affiliated with. So there's this issue of making sure that a diverse group of people have access to these programs. It's important that when people are being invited in, encouraged to participate in an education and training program, that they understand clearly what their employment choices and the career pathways look like. So data about wages, the quality of these jobs, that's all critical to be providing to people. And then again, really working more closely with the companies, the businesses that you're helping develop a workforce for, to make sure that they're also doing kind of the right set of things from a hiring, training, and a retention perspective. So there's been some work that's gone on in looking more closely at what racial equity and inclusion looks like in certain sectors of the economy. So healthcare and IT have been two areas recently where the organization Race Forward has done some deeper work in trying to understand what are some of the barriers to entry and retention and advancement within these fields. There's been some work also done in fields like construction and manufacturing and kind of the more traditional, I think, areas of employment. And as a result of looking more closely into what some of the barriers are and opportunities for change, I think there's a set of practices that are emerging, or a set of solutions that, again, I think are applicable to really any sector and any program that's focused on trying to create a more diverse pipeline. So this report kind of outlines a set of solutions that are applicable potentially to your field of work. And then this report from the Associated Black Charities really developed a great set of questions sort of at a programmatic level for an education and training organization to look at, to really make sure that you're doing a deeper dive around some of the data that you have access to, some of the goals you're setting, looking more closely at what some of the recruitment barriers might be for your program, looking more closely at what some of the retention issues might be for your program. Again, looking at ways in which you might strengthen your partnerships with community-based organizations that are actually working with more diverse residents within a community. So there's a nice set of questions here that I think are helpful to guide sort of thinking at the program design level. And then there's other assessments that are out there, this one again by Race Forward, that help an organization kind of look more at whether or not it's making a commitment to racial equity and inclusion. If so, like, what are the different aspects of your organization that you need to be focusing on, starting at the top from a leadership development perspective, and then really going all the way to looking at what your organizational practices look like. And so my organization is actually working with a network of national workforce development organizations, and we're using this framework that's called Awake, Woke, and Work. And that framework includes the self-assessment tool that allows us to sort of do a baseline assessment of where our organization is, both in terms of our internal practices and also our external practices and the partners that we're working with. And so we're on a journey right now of working with this assessment and the data from it, and developing a whole set of capacity building for our organization, and also putting some policies and practices into place so that we can grow the number of people of color, that we can have more people of color working in our organization, and make sure that the people of color we have working in our organization feel like it's a place that's welcoming, inclusive, and they have the potential to grow and develop, not only in our organization, but in the field. So this is kind of a real case example of that, some of those other assessment tools that I mentioned in play. I'm going to just wrap up here by talking a little bit about what we've seen in terms of some of the areas of work that are probably closest to the climate mitigation adaptation space. And so during the American Recovery Act in 2009, there was a whole round of investing in a number of different strategies and programs that had to do with the green job, sort of green economy space. And so we have a lot of great examples of many programs and things that were tried in these different sectors to make sure that a more diverse and inclusive workforce was being engaged and developed. So I think there's a good set of prior examples. And then more recently, I think the state of California has probably done the most to really come up with a model that is focusing on these partnerships, jobs, and education and training that's kind of at the center of, or the nexus of, climate equity and job creation. So there's this report that sort of outlines this mix of partnerships and programs that are in play. And I guess one of them that I highlighted here has been doing some work in the water industry, and really trying to look at some ways that there could be a regional training model put into place for utility workers. They've also got a strategy for focusing more on youth and how to engage youth in water and wastewater management utilities. I guess in closing, the thing I wanted to mention is that I was talking with Rachel about kind of the array of organizations that are in this network and the different ways in which you might be thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think some of the work I've done recently with this in Detroit with the community development field there feels a little akin to where you all might be, just in terms of thinking about who is it you're trying to work with and engage. So in the case of Detroit and this community development field that we were working with, you know, they essentially said there's a mix of people we need to engage in the community development field here in Detroit. Our commitment is to having a more diverse group of people working in all of these organizations and the jobs that are in play here. And these are the different ways in which we're thinking about that. So there's the grassroots volunteers or who are doing a lot of community development work, but not necessarily in a pathway, either from an education or a work perspective, that is kind of paying them and has, you know, some potential for career growth or mobility. And so they wanted to focus on that group as one group to try to engage and target some strategies for. There was this other group they called aspiring potential leaders, and I think that was where we ended up focusing with them more on youth and others who, you know, are kind of entering into the workforce. There's a group of like professionals who are sort of at their mid-level, mid-career, who are leaders of color but need more support and you know, help in navigating how to move up within the field or potentially move into other opportunities. And then there's like the set of professionals who are in some what they were calling affiliate organizations, and so they also wanted to target some strategies. So I think all of the practices I shared earlier are great and applicable, I think, for really any education and training organization to apply or to consider applying. But I think ultimately being clear about who you're trying to work with and why, or kind of at what end of what point in the pipeline are you trying to focus on, is really critical, because I think there are absolutely different strategies you want to put into place, you know, depending on who you're trying to work with. And there's a lot of different program models out there. And again, the funding for any of this is probably going to be dependent on where anyone sees the greatest opportunity. So I know in the climate change space in general, we hear a lot about the importance of engaging youth and really continuing to engage them and have them be leaders in this work and in the field. And I think that's really important. And there's obviously, you know, I think a lot of other people who aren't youth who may also be interested or already working in the community in this field that could be supported in some different ways. So just wanted to sort of come back around to being clear about who you're trying to engage and to what end, just as part of an overarching or underlying thing to keep in mind as you work toward developing your pipeline. So with that, Rachel, I'm going to stop.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jeannine. Yeah, we'll definitely open up the floor for questions for Jeannine. And I'm going to just reclaim the host back from you, Jeannine, as well, if that's all right. So I can
Sounds good.
Now have ultimate control of this meeting. And folks can feel free to unmute themselves and chime in with any questions or anything you'd like Jeannine to expand on.